There's some developments that have happened just in the last 12 hours. The Russians announced formally this morning that they have retaken the entirety of the Kursk Oblast. Russian General Staff Gerasimov addressed Putin and said this.
Comrade Supreme Commander-in-Chief, today the last populated area in the Kursk region, the village of Gornal, has been liberated from Ukrainian units. In this regard, the units of the 22nd Motorized Rifle Regiment of the 72nd Division, the 810th and 40th Separate Marine Brigades, the 177th Separate Marine Regiment, and the 1427th Motorized Rifle Regiment distinguished themselves. Thus, the defeat of the armed formations, the armed forces of Ukraine, that invaded the Kursk region has been completed.
So what the Russians are saying now is that about a month ago, they made this huge move where after, I guess it turned out to be around 8 months since August of last year, there was, remember that big thing where the Russians penetrated into a gas pipeline and then went like 13 or 16 kilometers inside the pipeline and then burst out behind the Ukrainian front lines. And just had a big rout of it, and it just caused this cascade effect, and like 80% of what was left just collapsed into a small portion here, and it took another month plus, I guess, to kind of get them pushed out. But now then the Russians are saying that has been completed. Most of the independent mappers, I did a quick check this morning, seem to agree with that assessment. And there's literally just a couple of slivers of a field and a meadow that are still formally or technically not yet cleared. The Russians hadn't gotten up to that border. But the cost to the Ukraine side has been monumental. Ukraine launched this in August of last year with this big claims that they were going to punish Russia, that they were taking the fight to their territory, et cetera, that they were going to, show them what's what and cause Russia to have to redeploy troops from elsewhere. And it was going to cause all these cascading effects, none of which happened. And in fact, what did happen was that the Ukraine side, because of its foolish tactical and operational decisions, sacrificed the lives, at least according to the Russian side, of 76,000 killed and wounded of their troops. And there were thousands of total vehicles, combat vehicles, armored vehicles all together, an enormous loss. Many of these were units that had been trained by NATO countries. Many of these guys were some of their most effective fighters. And to keep this whole thing throughout this whole 8-month plus operation, they continued to send in reserves after reserves and reinforcements and logistics and ammunition, all these things that were desperately needed elsewhere. They just threw them into something that I talked about at the opening salvo. It had no chance of success, and it played out exactly that way. Not because I'm any kind of a brilliant strategist, but because I can read a map and I can read a balance of power. I can read a spreadsheet. Anyone who can do those two elementary things, like maybe a private or a sergeant in the Army, even a lieutenant could get this one, is that it was going to be pointless. There was no chance that after 3 years of war that you were going to launch an offensive into Russia when you didn't even have the capacity to stop the defensive onslaught that you were trying to defend against in your own country. So it was always going to be foolish. And now then that whole debacle has been laid bare. All of the claims that Zelensky made, all the promises that he made, all the things that he told people to continue fighting were all in vain. All of them have been killed, captured, or had to be withdrawn back into the Ukraine side. But now here's the problem, and this is where it starts to impact on these negotiations right now, because General Gerasimov continued on saying that, and oh, by the way, our objective, not just to come back to the border.
In accordance with your instructions, the creation of a security zone in the border areas of the Sumy region of Ukraine continues. 4 settlements have been liberated. The total area of the controlled territory is more than 90 square kilometers. In addition, in the Belgorod region, units of the Savor Group have completed the destruction of Ukrainian sabotage groups in the area of the settlement of Popovka.
So this is continuing on, and you heard him say in there, this is, you may also recall a month or so ago when Putin famously went to the front to meet with General Gerasimov. He was wearing his camouflage uniform for the first time in the war that we had seen anyway in the United States. He has said, yeah, in accordance with what you said there, we have continued to move into Sumy. Let me show you a map real quick. This is the area we're here. So this is the last village that was I'm sorry, this Gomal here. This is the last village that was cleared last night. So it was the last one. So now then you have just a couple of meadows and a couple of forest belts here that are still left to reset here. But then you look up a little bit north here. This is Ukrainian territory. This is stuff that Russia has taken here, and you see all these are contested areas. This is something that's firmly in Russian control, and all these kind of gray areas here are where the current fight is. So it's all heading south, all pushing toward the city of Sumy itself, which is down here. So you see that the Russians continue to push down here. They're not going to stop here. And he also mentioned in the Belgorod area, he said that we're continuing to push forward there. You may recall that there was a demonstration into the Belgorod area, also an attack in which made headlines for 2 or 3 days on the Ukraine side. Equally foolish. That's also been pushed out. And so the question is, how much further is Russia going to go into Ukraine in this area? And then there's certainly all the areas on the eastern flank as well. So all those things are going to continue on. And the Russian general said, in accordance with what you said, we're going to continue fighting. Now, you can understand already saying that now, why is the Russian side going to suddenly agree to a full and unconditional ceasefire when they have just routed you out of one big painful thing and gotten you pushed out of their territory? They're already, according to him anyway, 90 square kilometers into the Sumy territory. They're continuing to move that forward. Where is the value for the Russian side to stop? Now, that's just what the general reported. Now, Putin's response to that is even more telling.
The Kiev regime's adventure has completely failed, and the huge losses suffered by the enemy, including among the most combat-ready, prepared and equipped, including the Western samples of the Navy, the assault units of the Special Forces, will certainly affect the entire line of combat. The complete defeat of the enemy in the Kursk border creates conditions for further successful actions of our troops and on other important sections of the front, and brings the defeat of the neo-Nazi regime closer.
So, point blank, this creates the conditions for the ongoing drive into Ukraine. And the most important thing he says, that last phrase, the defeat of the Nazi regime. So he is not looking to make a deal. He is on the front foot militarily. They show no evidence of taking their foot off the gas pedal to anything. They seem now prepared to push it further. We've been reporting that large groupings of Russian forces in the north, in that area there, have been building up. There was also the announcement overnight in the Russian side of the creation of a new army command in the north. So they've had the group of forces north that have been operating that whole Sumy, Chernihiv area that's in the Kursk area. Well, now then they've created a second front. So they've now divided the headquarters, and you don't create a headquarters unless you also have forces for them to command. And so it appears that they may be getting closer to actually launching that long-feared spring offensive. And if they bring that pressure when there's already weakness, and the Ukraine side is way on their back foot, they don't have enough manpower to even replace losses that we've talked about. They're in the process of trying to now legally capture 18 and 19-year-olds to bring them into this war. Russia sees all that. And then they hear that, okay, yeah, you can, quote, have Crimea. Russians go, yeah, it's already ours, so that's not a concession. You see that Zelensky's looking for security guarantees. Zelensky's looking for foreign troops to be stationed on a demilitarized zone. They're seeing that even the Vice President Vance on Monday said that, yeah, there would be an end of war somewhere along the current line of contact. Why would Russia agree to any of that? You have the New York Times saying that, yeah, even one of the absolute core issues was NATO in Ukraine, and even that has got a little nod, wink, wink situation. Why in the world would Russia agree to any of this? If you're taking the emotions out of it and your national connections out of it, and you're just looking at it in just naked power dynamics, if you're on the Russian side, I can't think of a reason why, when you have this history of the Western side not keeping its word, saying one thing, meaning another, and then taking actions that would actually put some of your ethnic people at risk, which they were doing in the Donbass with the civil war that had broke out from 1920 to 14 up through 2022. You see that they're even now kind of waffling on what their word is. You see the other side, even after all these defeats, is still trying to say, we want all these things and we want a unconditional ceasefire. I mean, why would they do any of that? I can't think of a reason. I suppose there's always some give, because it's not as though the Russians wouldn't gain something by having this terms that Trump's talking about. Having all of the sanctions since 2014 removed would be a huge boost to their economy. Having de jure control over Crimea, de facto control over the other 4 oblasts up to that territory, those are not minor. But to the Russians, many of the Russians anyway, that's not sufficient with the amount of blood and treasure they have expended. And they're saying, okay, we have them where we want them. We've had 3+ years of the depletion of NATO rounds and ammunition. They are clearly almost depleted. If we take our foot off the gas now and agree to a ceasefire or an end of term negotiations on the current line of contact or anywhere close to it, then all that's going to do is give the other side time to build back up. And they already have some history of exactly that happening during that period from 2015 when the Minsk Accords were signed up until 2022. That's exactly what the Ukraine side did. They built up their forces, they trained them with NATO, et cetera, and all that. And then they made moves that the Russians interpreted anyway, that they were getting ready to take by force the lands where the ethnic Russians were living at the time. Why would you then say, yeah, we're gonna see if this time they'll not do any of those things? I just don't see it. I don't see any reason why they should do that when they have the power to compel further. And I think that Putin is really signaling really strongly there in that last phrase, the defeat of the neo-Nazi, or the Nazi regime, as he calls them. It would be an astounding turnaround for him to now negotiate with that very entity in the Latvian power. I think that there is no chance of that. So we need to be very clear-eyed on this in the West, that Trump wanting to get this war over with quickly, I can certainly understand his desire. I applaud his efforts. I think that was one of the biggest condemnations of the previous administration, is that all they wanted to do was keep shoveling coal into the engine so that the killing can continue on. Trump is very sharply focused on getting it over. So great on that, but he's going to have a really big choice to make very soon, I think. Are you going to be willing to make good on your word and walk if you don't get the deal? Because right now, according to what Zelensky himself sent out in an ex-post this morning, and what Putin said in that speech this morning, those two guys, I said it's like 4 corners of a boxing ring. They're like out of the boxing ring now. They're on opposite sides. They're out of the ring entirely. They're so far away. Those things are not reconcilable. They're completely opposite. So Trump is going to have a really, really big choice to make. Are you going to just make good on your word? Because if he doesn't, what is his alternative? If he doesn't walk away, because I've heard some people suggest may not be the case, what can he do? I mean, he'll then be seen as saying, okay, I told Zelensky, make this deal or we walk, and then Zelensky doesn't make the deal, and he's got Witkoff talking to Putin saying that here's the deal we want to make, and then he really often will come off doing neither for either person. So then he'll be looking weak and powerless, that he can't compel Ukraine to do anything, he can't convince Russia to do anything, and then the only thing that's left is for Russia to win on the battlefield, however long that may take. So Trump has gotten himself into a pretty tough situation right now. Now, I think the absolute only and best thing he can do right now that makes sense for the United States and for Ukraine is to make good on his claim and walk like next week, because you can't drag this out much further. At some point very soon, either Zelensky's going to have a radical change, or Putin's going to have a radical change. One of those two is going to have to, because Putin has got his foot on the gas, folks. He just had this huge military success here in Kursk. And oh, by the way, don't lose sight of this. May 9th is coming up. And in Russia, May 9th is a bigger holiday than Christmas and 4th of July and all that stuff rolled together, I'm told, by people who've lived in Russia before. And the last thing that Putin is even going to contemplate on the 80th celebration of the end of World War II, after this big victory in Kursk is to say, okay, I'm taking my foot off the gas pedal, and we're going to have a negotiated settlement now, because that'll put a bitter taste in the mouths of everyone. They are going to celebrate this victory in the Great Patriotic War, as they call World War II, and they're looking for another one now. And they see these victories on the battlefield, and they see the line continuing to move to the west on the Eastern Front. Nobody's going to be in a mood to be accommodating to anything on the other side of that line of contact. So I think that there's going to be more pressure on Putin to go even further, not to take his foot off the gas. So all of those things together really puts Trump in a no-win situation. Well, that's not entirely true. It's not a no-win situation. He can still proactively take charge and say, I'm going to take this action by walking, and it's on my terms. I get to walk off. If you don't walk, now then you're passive, and it's all on Putin's terms, and that won't play well with Trump. So I think that all in all, the likelihood is that sometime maybe as early as next week, Trump is going to walk. We'll wait and see how it's going to turn out here. That's what we have for you today from Daniel Davis Deep Dive. As always, ask you to like and subscribe. Also, I recommend you go back and looking at our exclusive interview with Russian Ambassador Dmitry Polyansky, which we had on yesterday. You can find it on our site there. By all means, go and check that out, because that gives you a lot of insight there too. He revealed a lot about what the Russian side is doing. So check that out. Be sure to like and subscribe if you haven't, and we will keep you updated on all of these events. Anything happens even over the rest of the weekend, come and check back here, because we'll be right on top of it for you. Thank you very much. We'll see you on the next episode of Daniel Davis Deep Dive.